Okay, sports fans, let's talk about the KOVE 450 Rally, or sometimes known as the KOLOVE or XL. They've gone through 3 name changes just to keep us all as confused as possible. And this is a divisive bike because there's some people that think this is damn near the second coming of Jesus. It should just be called the Jesus 450 Rally. On the other side of it is the tinfoil hat and armadillo helmet wearing people thinking that this bike is some kind of elaborate Chinese psyop. So is this thing the unicorn we've all been waiting for, or is this just a pony with a sword strapped to its head? And does this KOVE 450 Rally bike announce China's arrival into the Western market as a legitimate motorcycle manufacturer, or is this just another in a long line of unreliable and cheap and badly made Chinese motorcycles? You might be scratching your head saying, what the hell is a KOVE? Well, KOVE is a Chinese motorcycle brand founded in 2017 and run by a CEO who is a former semi-pro MX rider. Right out the gate, motorcycle enthusiasts are running the show, so that's a very positive sign. Not so positive for a lot of you is the red flag that it's made in China. Obviously, there's been some quality control issues over the years with a lot of Chinese motorcycles, so it does have that hurdle to overcome. The motor, the heart of the motorcycle, is a 450cc single liquid-cooled motor claimed to be making 53 horsepower and 42 newton meters of torque, which is a very respectable amount of power for a 450cc liquid-cooled motor. And get this, it has 5,000 kilometer service intervals, so you're not stuck with crazy intervals like a lot of other enduro motorcycles. So that is a big positive there, and I think something that a lot of people are getting excited about. The other real positive about this motor is that it's actually a Zhongshan motor. So for a lot of you, you might be thinking who the hell Zhongshan are. They're a major player in engine manufacturing in China, and they actually have not too bad of a reputation, at least within the Chinese system. And this engine you might have also already seen in the Fantic Caballero Rally 500, of which I've ridden, and it's quite an impressive little motor, packing a nice little bit of punch, and as I stated, has a decent service interval and is really fun to ride. It's quite promising. Long-term reliability, obviously the proof will be in the pudding. The dry weight of this bike is stated at 145 kilos, which is pretty damn respectable for a 450 with all those fairings, but it doesn't include the weight of the fluids and obviously that 31 litre fuel tank. So that's going to bring you well into the mid to high 170 kilos, which is pretty heavy for a 450 rally bike. Now there are 3 separate models to this bike. There is the full Rally Pro, which is called the Rally 450R Pro. That's made for professional racing. It's not meant to be road registerable. Then there's the Rally 450R, the standard model, which is basically a road going version of the Rally Pro. And the third model in the lineup is the Rally 450L. The L stands for the lower model. It's for you shorties out there so that you can still get a leg over. Now the forks themselves and the rear suspension are listed as KYB with a question mark, so that isn't exactly instilling confidence that not even the people selling the bike know what the suspension is yet, but let's assume that it's KYB. So up front for the Rally Pro model and the regular Rally road going version, so that's a 450R Pro and the 450R, they have 305 millimeters of travel up front and 300 mils of travel at the rear, and that yields you 310 millimeters of clearance. The lower model has 260 mil of travel up front and 250 mil of travel at the rear. The ground clearance is 270 mils, so still very respectable. Okay, you can see I've thrown up this chart, and this is a really good way of dissecting the different types of buyers within any kind of market. You can see the first on this rough graph is innovators, and that's basically the manufacturer here. They've identified a hole in the market. Then next up on the plate is what we're seeing now, and that's the early adopters. These are the people that get super excited by the concept and are willing to take the risk of getting something very early on where there's little support, we don't know the reliability. They're not worried about all that stuff. The mere fact that these innovators have offered a product that answers the problem that they're having in their riding experiences is enough reason for them to jump on board and take the chance. So I think that's where all the enthusiasm is coming from. Then we see this chasm, and that really is where I sit, is on the right side of that chasm. So the early majority. I'm basically watching all these early adopters and seeing how it goes. And that's the chasm, because we wait for all these early adopters to get the bikes. And if the reports start coming back that they're reliable, the accessory market starts coming behind this bike as well. That's where people like me, the early majority, start to jump in, because we have that confidence from the early adopters. And then of course you can see towards the tail end, the late majority, once they're very convinced that this bike is quite reliable, and derogatively there we can see the laggards. Those are the people that are very skeptical and live in a very narrow world under a very large rock. The real thing here that would convince you if you're looking at a 450 rally bike is the price. I'd guess by time it's on sale, it's probably creeping up to 20,000, maybe a bit over. But when you compare that to the other offerings for 450 rally racing, like the KTM 450 EXC over the counter with the rally kit, you're looking at almost 60,000 Australian dollars. So you could buy 3 of these buggers, and really might mean the difference between you getting into the sport and you thinking it's too expensive. If you're thinking about getting into rally racing, this might be your only option in the affordable market. If you're doing long distance riding, say you're heading to the Simpson Desert, this being relatively light, having a huge amount of fuel capacity and decent service intervals, those big remote rides, this bike is really going to excel at, assuming that it's reliable, and we have no way of telling yet. Or maybe you're just a regular rider, you're sick of your dual sport not having any wind protection, and you want a little more power than say your CRF 300 Rally, and this bike really is going to answer that call as well. Has China arrived in the motorcycle market? And the answer to that question, I think, is no, not yet, but we're certainly getting very close. And I think this is one of the first really decent efforts that's captured the imagination of the Western market. But why do I think we're not there yet? And why do I think China might actually get there? Well, I think we have to wind back to Japan and the post-war era and how society tends to go through cycles. Now, I'm going to draw this analogy, but it isn't exactly one for one here. They're going to have similarities and some differences. But let's put the sentiment together. Basically, at the moment, sentiment towards China is what I'd categorize as crap. The same was for Japan in the post-war era. In fact, I would argue sentiment against Japan was actually far more negative than what sentiment is here of China. So that is a major hurdle. And I point this out to show that Japan got over that hurdle despite what they'd done in the 40s. And the reason for that was they made a product that was simply irresistible because it was cheaper than the competition, more reliable, and serviced the needs of buyers far better than, say, the English motorcycles of the time or the American motorcycles of the time. So think your BSAs, your Triumphs, your Harley Davidsons, and your Indians. Japan really came out of the gates in the 50s, and by the 60s was really punching above their weight. And I think it's fairly analogous that China are in the stage that Japan were in the 50s. Sentiment against them is very strong, like Japan. They're making leaps and bounds in the technology and the quality of production. Are we quite there yet? No, we are not. But the rate of how they're improving, I don't think it will be long, say 5-10 year period where we will see bikes coming out of China that are on parity or close enough, yet still more affordable than the Western bikes, to convince an awful lot of people to say, you know what, bugger it. If Honda or KTM or BMW are not offering me what I want, I'm going to take a chance with this bike that's far more affordable and offers me what I need. And like I said, we're in the early adopter phase now, and there's going to be that chasm where everyone waits and sees how these Chinese motorcycles do in the Western market. And once we see that some of them are doing okay, that early majority, which is a large percentage of people, are really going to move in with force. And I think that's going to be very interesting. One of the real things that scared me straight out of the gate was getting information on this bike. Depending on the website and depending on the country, the specifications do not all line up. It's very hard to get solid information on this motorcycle. The other thing, which seems like a small thing, is the quality of the websites. There's also the dealership experience that you've got to consider. How many of those GPX dealers or KOVE dealers do you see? Probably zero. So how hard is it going to be to get this bike serviced? It might be quite difficult to get parts. How hard is it going to be to get in contact with this company to get the parts that you need in a timely fashion or at all? Reliability is also one of those things that isn't quite clear. Yes, we've seen the motor in the Fantic 500 Caballero Rally. We haven't seen how this motor performs in serious off-road riding, so this bike will be getting a whole lot more dust and see just basically a harder life. So the longevity of this motorcycle engine, as well as all the components bolted to it, is a big unknown. And on the back of that reliability question is the problem that you just don't know the common faults of the bike yet. Now, I can already hear some of you headbutting your keyboard saying solid 3 of these bikes were enrolled in the Dakar and all 3 of them made it to the end this year. And I would say yes, congratulations to KOVE, that is quite an achievement. But for the average Joe, we do not have a complete support team waiting for us at the end of every ride to make sure that nothing goes catastrophically wrong. So to answer my original question, is this the unicorn we've been waiting for? I do not think that this is the unicorn, at least not yet. Has the recipe down and correct. It's the back end that lets us down. The dealership, getting parts, the reliability question. So I think that it's got potential, but we're not quite there. We should be excited to see how this bike goes. Pay attention to the early adopters and how they find it. Those are my thoughts on the KOVE 450 Rally. I'd love to know yours as well. Are you one of those early adopters? Are you already all in, or are you one of the laggards who will be skeptical to the day you die? I'd love to know what you think about this bike, so chuck them down below. And until next time, don't forget to stay shiny side up, and I'll see you in the next one.